Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Doug Bell, and I'm the Chief Brand Strategist here at Searchmetrics. Today's webinar is on 2021 SEO predictions, featuring Jordan Cooney, the former CEO of Searchmetrics, Inc., Eric Inga, Principal at Proficient, and Mike King, Managing Director at iPullRank. Just a quick note on timing for everybody. This is a live webinar, and we do think it'll take approximately about 60 minutes. Let's talk about Q&A for a second. Because this is a live webinar, we are definitely encouraging you to ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer your questions at the end of the webinar, but you don't have to wait to the end. You can use the Q&A widget to ask your questions beforehand. There are a number of resources we think that you'll find useful. This includes the latest from our Voices of Search podcast. We have a podcast on SEO planning, defining yearly initiatives. Also from the Searchmetrics content store, we have a recent blog post on Core Web Vitals, getting ready for Google's page experience ranking factors update. Of course, a copy of today's presentation and a link to an invitation to our upcoming webinar, Core Web Vitals for Enterprise Business. Let's do a couple other quick things, just a note on Searchmetrics. Through our comprehensive suite of software services and research, our goal at Searchmetrics is to deliver the predictable success that allows the world's smartest marketers to reach all of their content and search goals. In other words, we believe in the power of insights to help marketers make better decisions and produce meaningful results. Okay, with all of that out of the way, it's my privilege now to introduce our guest for today's webinar. Let's start with Jordan Cooney. Jordan was the CEO of Searchmetrics, Inc. He's a veteran of the SEO industry and an ongoing advisor to Searchmetrics. Before coming to Searchmetrics, Jordan led the SEO team at eBay, and he's spoken at industry events around the world. This is just a short list, folks, but that includes SMX, PubCon, and the Digital Summit Series. Also joining us today is Eric Inga. Eric was named the 2018 Drum Search Awards Search Personality of the Year, the 2016 U.S. Search Personality of the Year at the U.S. Search Awards. And was also the Landy's 2016 Search Marketer of the Year. He is literally one of the people that wrote the book on SEO. He's the co-author of The Art of SEO. He keynotes at many industry conferences and is principal of Proficient, a full-service digital marketing agency. Also joining us is Michael King. Michael King founded the digital marketing agency iPullRank. He consults with some of the world's top brands like, and this is a very impressive list, folks, SAP, American Express, General Mills, and more. Mike's background includes roles as marketing director and tactical SEO at agencies like Razorfish. Plus, he is readily sought out for his contributions as a dynamic speaker and blogger. And myself, I'm your host today. I am the Chief Brand Strategist at Searchmetrics, and I'll be leading our discussion on 2021 predictions. Before we cover what our topics are going to be and really dig into the things that we think are really going to be impactful for SEOs in 2021, I need to start things off on a bit of a somber note. And I wanted to take a moment to express our shock and our sadness to learn that Hamlet Batista passed away recently. For those of you that aren't familiar with Hamlet, Hamlet was the CEO of RankSense. He was a beloved member of the SEO community. If you ever read the Search Engine Journal, you likely read content from Hamlet. He was a frequent speaker, a leading thinker, and a friend to so many. To Hamlet's friends and family, we pass on our condolences. I think, Mike, you wanted to say a quick word as well about Hamlet.
Yeah, I mean, Hamlet is a friend, was a friend, and you can't really say enough about what he's contributed to the industry, especially in recent years. But going back, further than when I was directly involved, as I understand it, he was also like a technical reviewer on the book that Eric wrote and so on. So there's just been so much that he's contributed, and he's just such a, he'll just be deeply missed. I don't want to say anymore. I'm going to just get upset again like I did last night.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks for that. And I think it goes without saying we dedicate today's webinar to the memory of Hamlet. So, okay, folks, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. We've got some really good topics. And I think that what we're hoping to do is by the time we're done today to give you some guidance in terms of what we think the impact of these topics are going to be. We're going to kick things off with a discussion around the cookieless world, which we're approaching pretty quickly, and what that's going to mean for SEOs and marketers broadly. We'll talk about how Google is going to mobile-only indexing in March. They've been threatening this for a long time. This looks like a hard date. We'll talk about what that means for everybody. We also know that Google is going to be breaking down content into passages and subtopics, really meaningful for content, especially long-form content. We'll get a little update on what's happening with the Google lawsuit. We'll also talk a bit about maybe what we think is going to happen with Facebook. And then we can't really get out of a 2021 predictions webinar without talking about GT3. I think you'll enjoy a lively debate as we dig in there. Okay, good. Folks, let's talk about what a cookieless world looks like. Mike, I want you to kick things off. Tell us what this is and how it's going to change the way marketers gather and use customer data.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it really kind of started with what Apple was doing with something that's called ITP, where they basically limited the lifespan of cookies. And just to level set, everything that we track as marketers with analytics, with ads and so on is functioning via cookies, right? And so Apple started off just being like, okay, we're not going to allow you to have anything beyond a 30-day window. Then they limited it to a 7-day window, and then it just got more constraining as they went on. And then of course Firefox got on board, and then Google, seeing the direction that things were going in, of course was like, okay, well, we're just going to take cookies completely out of the browser. It hasn't happened yet, but it's on the horizon. It's meant to happen this year. And so what that's going to do is limit a lot of people's data. You're not going to be able to do things as effectively as like doing retargeting from third-party data sources and so on. Like third-party data to some degree is going to evaporate. And so people are going to be more reliant on first-party data. And what that's going to do is kind of create these data monopolies, because you've got, your Amazons, your Facebooks, and your Googles who have had first-party data for, decades at this point. And so, well, not decades, but almost decades at this point. And so they're going to have all this data on you, and then, you're not going to be able to have data in the same way as a third party, because you can't track things as a third party anymore. So it's going to change a lot of things in digital marketing, and it's going to turn a lot of channels into like more of a not provided situation like we're used to as SEOs.
Okay, Mike, that's a great summary. Eric, it's a big deal, right? It's a really big deal. Third-party data going away from marketers. And Mike mentioned it before, retargeting is really going to be a struggle. How is this going to force brands to reconsider how they advertise? Eric, over to you.
Yeah, well, brands have become very dependent on having a very rich data set which they can use to target their advertising. That's what third-party data does for you, because you can draw in information about the user behavior from many places across the web. And as that information begins to disappear, it's going to put brands through this situation where what they're used to relying on to drive the performance of their advertising campaigns and the places where they choose to implement and run those advertising campaigns, all of that needs to be rethought, and it needs to be rebuilt, and you really need to think about your approach from the beginning. And the problem is that people aren't really prepping for this, and it's going to start to arrive really, really quickly all of a sudden. And I think a lot of people are going to get caught, without being prepared, and could damage customer acquisition, drive up customer acquisition costs. It's best to get ahead of it and start planning now.
It's really interesting, isn't it, guys? Because we're going to talk in a few minutes here about the impact of the antitrust lawsuits with Google and potentially with Facebook. And in many ways, this kind of defines the challenge. When third-party data is removed, we have so much more dependency on first-party data providers like Google and Facebook. So be warned, right. Google and Facebook, this was going to be brought up when those lawsuits are in full gear. Jordan, you're a former executive Searchmetrics. You put the worry hat. The worry monster was always the struggle for you. Should marketing executives be concerned? Should they be worried?
No question, marketing executives should be worried. I think you guys summarized it well in terms of the cost implications. But for the people listening today, the SEOs, I think that this puts a lot of pressure on SEO, because small or large organizations, SEO as a channel will now become a more important function, not only from a traffic acquisition perspective, but from a data acquisition perspective, because your only option now is to collect first-party data. And so every visit now counts just a little bit more. And if you can collect just a little bit more data about who that individual is on your site, you're doing a huge favor to your company and your organization. And so I think that that's really how this kind of neatly ties back into like what SEOs need to be thinking about and how they support the marketing mix and the executives who are probably going to come knocking on the door going like, what the hell are we going to do now that there's no more cookies and we're not able to tap into these third-party networks? And then secondly, I think this creates new opportunities. I think a lot of people fear the 800-pound gorillas, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples of the world who already control this data. But more importantly, I think that organizations can now band together and create their own kind of pools and find ways to exchange and trade data. I think there's a lot of examples of where this has been done, this democratization of data. But as this cookieless world starts to sink in and organizations struggle with how do we find audiences and how do we find consumers, they're going to look to partnerships to make that happen.
Jordan, it was an unusually kumbaya moment for you. So you're effectively saying there's an opportunity for the community to organize to really create that shared pool of first-party data. That's interesting. I think what I'm hearing from the team here today is that we're unprepared as digital marketers, but this will definitely benefit SEOs. And this is something we've been dealing with for a very long time. And I think we're well equipped to deal with it. So SEOs, while you can't go grab that digital marketing budget, that's certainly going to be coming your way very shortly. Okay, good. Folks, let's move on to our next topic. This is one of my favorites. I think Google going to mobile-only indexing in March. How have we been talking about mobile-only indexing, right? It's finally here, right? It's like Christmas. Okay, so we're here. Mike, I'm going to ask you to kick us off again. You've said in the past that mobile-only indexing represents a context problem for SEOs. Not everybody in this group agrees necessarily, which is perfect. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, what I mean by that is, our tools don't automatically check for the different contexts and compare things. So, imagine an environment where you're showing less content on mobile than you are on desktop, or less links or different canonical tags. And then imagine you introduce JavaScript versus non-JavaScript into that. So now you have 8 combinations that you should check for just to make sure that there's parity across all the things. And so, I'm not saying the people on this call, but like a lot of SEOs don't know that, running one crawl is not enough here to really determine what is it that Google may or may not be missing out on. And so, there's just like limited tools to solve this problem. And so I think once this rolls out, there's going to be a lot of people that get this rude awakening where, they're not sure why their site tanked. Because they're like, yeah, we have a mobile site, but they don't recognize that there isn't parity in that content between the different contexts. And so I worked on this project called the Web Almanac, and I worked on the SEO section of it. And one of the things that we looked at for the top 1 million websites was what were the disparities in links and content and so on between mobile and desktop. And it was something like 13% of pages were different in those contexts. So I think it's just going to be one of those things where, if people aren't keeping their eye on the ball with that, okay, I lost my traffic, I don't know what happened to me.
Yeah, I think you're nailing it here, Mike. I think it's going to be a real challenge. And as much as we think it's simplifying things, I think it makes things even more complex for SEOs, especially for web people that manage websites, IT in particular, and products. Eric, the context challenge for us, Mike described, it creates a bit of a market opportunity for some lucky company, does it not? You want to weigh in here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do think it creates a market opportunity. I'll actually just add an additional example to what Mike added, though, which is that we did some companion crawls of mobile and desktop sites against a number of major brands, and we saw with one globally known brand, who I won't out here, that their mobile site was presenting 7 pages to Google. And so unless they've fixed that, and I haven't checked recently, they're just going to disappear. So that creates the urgency for there to be a simple tool which will actually make this comparison kind of automatic. And by that, what I mean is, instead of like, okay, I'm going to run a crawl with a mobile user agent, I'll collect that data, and then I'll run one with a desktop user agent, and I'll collect that data, and now I'll put them in spreadsheets and start comparing them. Why don't we just create a tool, or have someone create a tool that just does that? Press the button, talk about the the versions of sites you want crawled, have it do them all automatically, drop out a report for you. It will save a lot of people a lot of trouble, and it's really, really important to get out in front of this stuff. And what comes with that, too, is we really have to enforce people to start thinking about designing their site for mobile first, and then maybe extracting their desktop site from it, rather than, designing a desktop site and then squeezing it down into a mobile site somehow. So maybe a tool will help people think about doing it that way.
Yeah, thank you, HTML5. I think that's actually a really great segue over to Jordan, because Jordan, when we kind of talked about this on some of our prep sessions for this webinar, you talked about saying, basically you said every SEO should take a course in mobile design, which in many ways kind of makes Mike's point, right? In this case, that context is king, and that your context needs to be factored in for design. So are we suddenly going to be flooding the design classes with SEOs, Jordan? What's your thought here?
Well, I mean, I think people need to go educate themselves, right? I mean, getting ready for mobile is one thing, but like actually knowing how to do combat in mobile is a different thing. And a lot of SEOs, and I hope our listeners take this to heart. Like we've spent a lot of time trying to like battle the message of mobile, but right now the conversation should be at this point, like, how do I optimize? How do I out yield? And how do I outperform everybody else? And so I don't really give 2 cents about tools. I know, funny coming from the CEO of a tool company, but the reality is tools are useless in this conversation. What you really need to know is, how do I have a conversation with the mobile UX people? How do I have a conversation with my engineering team about my mobile experience? And honestly, that's about educating yourself and getting to know both how you and your teams have developed the mobile experience and how other companies are developing theirs and how you can compete in the market. Honestly, the only third-party data set that would help you in this, in my opinion, are monitoring systems like New Relic or Treo or others out there that can kind of tell you both what you're doing and how your competitors are doing in that same space from a mobile experience standpoint. But outside of that, I mean, the reality here is people just need to go educate themselves.
Guys, it's funny. I think this is our 3rd straight year doing this together. I think the cast and crew changes slightly, but this is our 3rd straight predictions webinar. And I feel like we are the closest to the folks you used to see in New York City walking around the sandwich boards and the bell saying the end is nigh. So if we've not sufficiently scared all SEOs out there with cookieless and with mobile-only indexing, you're not paying attention, folks. So these are big things, obviously, that we're concerned about it as SEOs. I'm going to take us off this topic. I'm going to move us on to our next topic. What I want to talk about is how Google will start breaking down passages and subtopics and presenting them a bit differently than I think we're used to in the SERPs. I want Eric to kick us off here. Explain the concept first, and then tell us what this means for content, Eric.
Absolutely, and we're gonna pull out of the gloom and doom and into the world of opportunity by talking about passages and subtopics. So now we're into the uplifting part of this webinar. So first of all, let's just talk about what passages are. So passages is the concept that Google might be able to extract a sub-element of content within a larger web page and rank that sub-passage or that subsection of content based on the quality and relevance of that content alone. And so think of it as extracting nuggets of information from inside a larger piece of content. Now, typically or historically, those nuggets of information would not have emerged from a ranking perspective because the broader context of the page might have made it difficult for Google to consider it for a query related just to that individual subtopic or passage, if you will. So what that means is, again, Google's going to get better at extracting these bits of information from within pieces of content. It means that you actually have more ranking opportunities if you understand how to create content that does a good job of addressing the breadth and depth of and a variety of user questions. And not that each document doesn't necessarily have to be, so narrowly defined to one topic area. And I think this will create some really strong opportunities for those who take the time to thoroughly map out the entire, what I call the user needs space that that consumers or potential customers have around whatever your particular page is about. So getting into more nitty-gritty details and specific questions can bring great rewards is what I think I'm trying to say. The other area is around subtopics. And this is the idea that Google will actually start changing the way they present their search results. So the example that Google shared in their announcement of this is somebody searched on home exercise equipment, exercise equipment, and then a subtopic of the result might be presented around home exercise equipment or low-cost exercise equipment or things like that. So they're going to begin to subdivide the search results for many different kinds of queries. So to me, the reason why this is such a huge opportunity is I've long been a fan that producing what I'll call volumes of quality content actually can bring really great rewards if you do a good job of addressing a big breadth and depth of user needs. So that's sort of my view on it. I actually think it creates a ton of opportunity for all of us.
And Eric, what you're not saying is just jam your page is full of content. You're saying really well-designed, well-considered content that meets the need of users will be especially important, and more so with this change coming up from Google.
Absolutely. The quality is, I'm a fan of quantity, but a quantity of quality content, not a quantity of low quality content. So
that makes sense. Yeah. Mike, you've been writing about this and you've been talking about this for a long time. So what are your thoughts? We all understand that long form content is king yet again. What else would you say to the audience here in terms of how they should prepare for this?
Yeah, I think it changes the long tail. I think that a lot of people, especially when you're a site that's less authoritative, you target the long tail queries and like you make these really hyper-focused pages on these long tail queries. But now with Google's better understanding of subtopics, I think what we're going to see is those pages that are more robust that will rank for that. And so it's not going to be as easy for a less authoritative site to rank for those long tail queries. So I think it's also going to support an argument that Eric and I are going to have later about GPT-3 and so on. Whereas like a lot of people are using generated content to tackle the long tail, but now that this more robust content can rank for it, it's just going to change those strategies for people.
I thought the argument was going to be who has the best sports fans, the New England or the Philadelphia region. That would be an interesting webinar. We should schedule that. There you go.
You need a webinar. It's no contest.
We won't tell you guys which side those guys land on. So okay, good. Thanks, gentlemen, for that one. I think that in and of itself is a huge kind of win for the SEO community. It's how you manage it, how you deal with it. But I'm looking forward to the first major brand that is displaced at the top of the SERPs by a subtopic for a small site. It will happen. Look forward to it. So go SEO. We're going to move on to our next topic. We're going to have Jordan kick us off here. He is passionate about this. Our prediction, with a little bit of grain of salt, is that antitrust lawsuits against Google will have no impact on SEOs in 2021. I caveat that by saying that we do think that a lot of the openness that we're seeing from Google, particularly about exactly what's going to be in their algorithm updates, and when they're occurring, we think that transparency is a little bit of kind of a preview of how they might be preemptively altering their behavior to counter the antitrust lawsuits. But Jordan, for the uninformed, give us a high-level view on the Google lawsuit and how you think it will impact marketers in all of 2021. And then I'm going to ask Eric to weigh in about Facebook.
Sure. I think, if you haven't read the claims in the U.S. State Department's lawsuit against Google, you should. And there's 12 specific bullet points that they highlight as to why they are suing Google specifically over their search business. And that's what they're doing. They're literally suing Google over their search business and their monopolistic practices, how they've partnered with other companies to embed the search experience within those products, including their partnership with Apple and iPhones. The reality here is that there are many regulators and lawmakers and institutions globally that are coming after Google and suing them for their control of the marketplace and the way that they essentially create a competitive marketplace. And I think that what we should be taking away as SEOs, because will there be impact in 2021? I think so. It will not be a direct one-to-one correlation from the lawsuit. This lawsuit will be drug out over a year or more and will probably actually fall apart with the new administration. But it will be resurged in probably a new form in coming months, because what we're at here is a tipping point where legislators and governments are figuring out ways to better regulate Google. And that, I think, is the key takeaway. And as search marketers, we should be thinking about what governments and organizations are trying to do to come after Google. Let's take, for example, Australia. Australia is trying to force Google and Facebook, I believe, to pay publishers, news publishers, for using their content. Just for a second, like, hold that in. Like, I'm using your content for free to drive traffic and awareness to my search engine or my social media platform. And now I'm going to be forced by a government to pay those news outlets, right? And I think that it's interesting how different organizations and governments are trying to regulate these massive companies, and it will happen, and it will impact industries and verticals. So if I have any prediction about how this is going to unfold over the next 12, possibly 24 months, is that there will be verticalization in how this happens. There will be specific industries or specific groups whose voice is heard loudest, and they will be supported. And this has already happened for 5 to 7 years in Europe, where the classified industries and other industries have won battles against Google, and they've created new regulations in the way that their content can be served in Google. And I think this is going to happen more and more, because Google and many other big tech companies have had kind of a free ride in terms of the way that they utilize other people's assets.
And Jordan, you mentioned you feel like with the new administration, so Jordan, you're referring to the Biden administration coming in, you feel like potentially this loses some steam. Do you feel like that is a function of just kind of the anti-tech / social media rhetoric that was coming from the Trump administration, or do you feel like maybe the Biden administration doesn't see this as being as big a problem? It's not as clear a monopoly to them.
I will be perfectly clear. I think that this has very little to do with politics and parties. It has a lot more to do with there's a better way to organize this battle, and you can get a lot more consensus with more attorney generals across more states and with bigger power and bigger voice if you consolidate what you're trying to sue Google over and you actually show real data. And this is one of the reasons why I want people to read the 12 bullet points, because they're all about search. All these 12 bullet points that they put in this lawsuit are all about search and how search engines work. But if you read it, it is so vague and it is so wide and it is so far reaching, there's no way you're going to make a legitimate argument in court. But if you focus on a vertical or an industry, you can probably see where things will go and how things will be regulated there. And so that's why I think there will be a new momentum across more states and across on a very specific topic, and that will probably win out in court better than what they have today.
So I want to shift over and have Eric talk a bit about Facebook, because I think we all understand that Google's not the only monopoly when it comes to data. We talked about first-party data earlier and how really in many ways the cookieless world cements this death grip that these first-party data holders like Facebook, like Google, like Amazon, like others have. And I'm going to open this up with you, Eric, and just say, do you feel like some of the additional transparency, if you will, we're seeing from Google is their kind of nod to the fact that they have been a monopoly in many ways and haven't been as transparent because they don't have to be? Or do you feel like that was going to happen anyway? And then walk us a bit through about what's happening with Facebook, if you will.
Yeah, no, I do think that there is some response to the regulatory pressure and the lawsuits by Google, and they are trying, as Jordan said, to do a certain amount of preempting the pressure, if you will. And it's really important for them to do that because the pressure is very real. I mean, I lost count of the number of billions of dollars that the EU has fined Google at this point, for example. And they've been slapped many times there. And it's very reasonable to expect that some level of action will happen here in the United States. There's a lot of sentiment that says that these large tech companies are a threat to, well, literally to our democracy and the level at which people are talking about these things. So, but as much as it pains me, I further agree with Jordan. Sorry, Jordan, I had to work something like that in here somewhere. That the immediate impact, other than this behavior of divulging a little more information, is something that Google will continue to do, and it may even amp up a little bit more as they get deeper into further down the path with all this. Facebook has also been tagged. 46 states and together in this lawsuit against Facebook, and a lot of it is around the fact that they control the three largest platforms, or three of the largest, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and a number of things that Facebook has been doing that are perceived as anti-competitive. So let's try one out for size here. So it's alleged that developers who create apps on the Facebook platform or one of the Facebook-owned platforms are being prohibited from developing apps for other social media site platforms. And if they don't actually comply with this requirement by Facebook, they can lose their access to the API. So things like this, a certain amount of this is natural when you get a certain amount of control. We've seen this kind of stuff from Microsoft for a long time too, right? So this type of anti-competitive behavior. So I do think things are going to happen, and there is going to be action taken against these larger players. Not in 2021. It's just going to get dragged out, just exactly as Jordan said. And yeah, we're going to have to see what happens, but it's going to have a big impact over the longer term on our industry for sure.
Well, that's why I asked, kind of quizzed Jordan a bit about whether or not he felt like, we were in a situation, I mentioned it to you as well, Eric, we're in a situation where potentially the Biden administration kind of lets this go or drops it. I would assume, in fact, the Biden administration would be even more antitrust on some level. And so if there is an impact, what I'm hearing from both of you guys is that it may not come directly as a result of conclusions drawn in the lawsuits, but in many ways, maybe Facebook and Google trying to alter their behavior so that as the consequences of the lawsuit come forth in, say, 2022, 2023, they're maybe less impactful because they've, as we said before, preempted them. Mike, I wasn't planning on having you jump in here at all because I do want to get to GPT-3, but did you have any thoughts on the antitrust lawsuits with Google or Facebook?
Yeah, one quick thing that I think is kind of self-evident here, and you kind of just touched on it, is this idea that, these companies are full of smartasses. And what I mean by that, and my apology if I just said a bad word, what I mean by that is, like, as they interpret whatever these consequences are, they identify other ways for them to get advantages. And so, when you look at, like, going back to the cookie list thing, well, that's their way of saying, like, okay, well, we're creating more privacy by doing this, but at the same time, they're actually deepening their monopoly. So I suspect what these long-term impacts that we're talking about are going to be them identifying other ways that actually make it better for them.
Yeah, and I think if we've somehow offended Facebook or Google or anybody else, I would let you guys know that there are three really great companies you should consider acquiring. They are Searchmetrics. We will stop talking about it. iPullRank and Proficient. Jordan, what do you think? Just shut us up by acquiring. What do you think? We're going to keep having webinars until you guys shut us up. All right. Well, good. Mike, thanks for weighing in there. We have really reserved a lot of time to talk about GPT-3. And the prediction here, let me move on to the right slide. The prediction here is that GPT-3 will not result in mass content marketing layoffs. Boy, guys, talk about the sandwich board again, right? But we're saying GPT-3 will not result in mass content marketing layoffs in 2020. Okay. But hey, I don't know that everybody knows what GPT-3 is and why it would seem so threatening and why we're so excited to debate it and talk about it. So Eric, I want you to kick us off here. What is GPT-3? Tell us why you're a bit of skeptic on this topic. and what you see as the limits for GPT-3 is it's rapidly diminishing its practical utility. Eric, take it away, and then Mike, you're next. Worry not, my friend. Eric, go.
Okay. So, well, first of all, GPT-3 is an amazing development in AI. So it's basically, it's an auto-regressive language model. And it's really around natural language processing capabilities that can be used for a variety of purposes. There's some amazing demos for GPT-3, by the way. The Guardian, the English newspaper, had an article completely written by GPT-3 for them. The article, in case you're interested, was about how AI was not a threat to humanity. It's pretty human-like text, although you can tell from reading it that it's not specifically human-generated. But what makes it so spectacular and such a leap forward from what preceded it is that the previously largest natural language processing model that was the Microsoft Turing model, which had a capacity of 17 billion parameters, whereas GPT-3 has a capacity 10 times that, or 175 billion parameters, which is a crazy leap forward. And you can see it in terms of the demos that have been given for GPT-3. Just a little more background. Currently, access to GPT-3 is something you have to request, and it is something that's being screened by OpenAI, which is a company that created GPT-3. First of all, I'm a big fan of it, and there's a lot of things that you can do with it. You can create content, you can create summaries of content, you can have it auto-summarize your emails, you can potentially even have it auto-fill out spreadsheets that are tables and spreadsheets that are partially complete, and these are things that it can do. Where it runs into some limits is due to the way that it was built and how it was trained. Basically, it was trained on the open internet. And in case you haven't wandered out into the open internet lately, please take care when you go out there. It's kind of an ugly place. There's a lot of stuff going on in the open internet. So there are questions that have been asked of GPT-3, which have brought up really frightening results. So, for example, there was a demo question where somebody asked something that related to something about Jewish people, and it came back and said things about Jewish people being bankers and stuff that was basically racist, because that's what it learned on the open internet. The other challenge that GPT-3 has is that it has no model basically for the real world. So its real world is the internet. So it doesn't actually understand those other aspects of the world around us. And I guess the way I'll summarize my commentary on this is just with a quote from OpenAI founder Sam Altman. And this is what he said about it in a tweet. The GPT-3 hype is way too much. It's impressive, and then in parentheses, thanks for the compliments, but it still has serious weaknesses and makes some silly mistakes. AI is going to change the world, but GPT-3 is just a very early glimpse. So before I turn it over to Mike and he can start arguing with me, and I'm ready, I'm actually a big fan of this step forward. But what you see when you study the data about how it's beginning to approach a human understanding of language and information, if you draw that level of understanding as measured in many tests on a chart, starting with early versions of autoregressive language models like GPT-2 and the Turing model from Microsoft through GPT-3, as you see these models get more complex, the curve is leveling off and reaching, sorry for a mathematical concept here, folks. Jordan, you won't get this, sorry. It asymptotes, and it's no longer beginning really to approach human understanding. It's leveling off. See, I thought I'd bring in the feistiness stuff. But so to me, I think there's additional advances needed beyond just adding more parameters before we get to the point where GPT-3 truly, or any AI, truly gets to a human level of understanding. So that's my thought.
Okay, thank you for thank you for slipping that Jordan comment in there, Eric. I will give you brownie points for that one. Thank you. I'll summarize what Eric said to us here, and then I'm going to tee things up for Mike. And in our prep session, guys, this has erupted into debate several times, so we're looking forward to Mike's perspective here. But really what Eric is saying is he's impressed by the technology, especially this represents a real leap forward. But because it's been trained on the open internet, there's a certain amount of content that's just completely inappropriate, right? And we're also kind of, I think it's called asymptotic. I can't pronounce that word, but we're quickly, thank you, reaching the point of diminishing returns. And we open this up by talking about how this is not going to cause mass layoffs for content marketers. But you said, Eric, you're excited about this because of its potential as a natural language processing content creation capability. It really could kind of move things forward very quickly for content marketers and SEO. So we get that piece, but we understand its limits. Now, Mr. King, you have a slightly different perspective. Did Eric get anything wrong about GPT-3? Because we know those New England people can be a little slow. And then what are your thoughts here?
I deeply respect Eric, and I've learned so much from him. So I'm not gonna, I can certainly break this down in a way that could, kind of, anyway. So here is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about natural language generation in general, because GPT-3 is just one of the language models that's available. It's the most popular because you're hearing about it in regular media and so on. But like you said, it's trained on, 175 billion parameters? Well, Google has a version of T5, which was trained on 1.6 trillion parameters. So what they're finding, and this is one of the points that Eric brought up, is that there is diminishing returns as you add more. But as you add more, things become better for certain use cases. So the one that I'm mentioning right there is specifically for what's called data to text. So you can give it structured data and say, write me a sentence about this structured data. So my point is this. There are a lot of menial tasks that we as SEOs have done, like writing paragraphs that go at the bottom of e-commerce category pages, or writing metadata, or any number of things that actual writers don't want to do. All of that can be scaled down. All of that can be generated to a point where you have a solid first draft that is worthy of an editor to make slight adjustments to, and then you can publish it. So what I believe is going to happen once we start using like knowledge graphs to vet things and more grammar checking solutions as well, at some point we're going to be able to generate perfectly optimized content where it doesn't require a ton of work for it to be reviewed prior to publish. Now, I'm not saying that is this year. I'm not saying that is next year. But 3 years, yeah, I think that's reasonable to expect. Because one of the main issues that we have with any of this software, and this is, again, what Eric was touching on, is that it doesn't understand facts. It only understands the relationships between words. Right? Like transformer technology is like, okay, I've ingested a ton of words and I know that often this word comes after this word and it keeps going until it constructs a sentence. So GPT, 1, 2, and 3 all take specific prompts and you're like, okay, here's the start of the sentence. Now write me a whole page on this. And so it's just going to line up the words. They're going to sound right like a person wrote them, aside from that little uncanny valley thing that you have with anything AI related. But at some point, that's going to be solved. And at some point, it's going to be very easy for people to generate content. I brought up the point that, with the content experience product that you guys have, what you're doing is you're reverse engineering what are the features of things that rank? And there's any number of tools out there now that do something similar to that. Now, if you take all that information and then you also take, the ability to generate copy and you compare that, then you add a knowledge graph to it, then you're able to say, okay, let me generate copy that fits these criteria as far as the features of content, makes sense, and then is also as if someone else wrote it. And the last point I want to make here is that with most of these, and specifically GPT 1, 2, and 3, well, not 3 yet, but definitely 2, you can do what's called fine tuning, right? So it has its base level of information that it's learned from, the parameters that we're talking about, where we take, the common crawl or big crawl of the web, and we say, hey, learn from this. But you can also scrape your own site and give it to it and say, okay, well, you have your base set of knowledge, take this set of knowledge and learn from it and refine what you're going to say to me based on that. And this is something that we use today for our clients, where it's like e-commerce site, they've got a blog or whatever, and we scrape the whole thing, fine tune it, and then say, okay, give me copy about this category. And the content that it spits out today is like 90% perfect. We're only having to go in and say, well, this isn't a fact, or let's use this co-occurring keyword a little more and things like that. So the technology, it works. And, what SEO has done for the last 15 years has been far less than this. Like, there are sites right now, Fortune 500 or whatever, S&P, whatever, websites, companies that have terrible content that isn't valuable to anybody. And if you look at their, Wayback Machine thing, and then also look at the visibility report in Searchmetrics, you'll see that they've deployed this and their visibility shot up. So the reality is, content that's not as good as what GPT-3 is spitting out today is performing. Now, if you take this stuff, which is actually worth reading, it's going to perform as well. And that's all I got.
Okay, so it's funny. I think we had
is a big aspect of this, and that's one of the ways to get there with GPT-3 or 2, I should say, at this point. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think through our pre-discussions, we found common ground between Eric and Mike. Sorry, guys, we had more our arguments earlier, but what I'm hearing from the two of you really is we can debate the utility of GPT-3 in 2021, but even just taking GPT-2 and its utility and the advancements that GPT-3 has made, even accepting its limits, and especially if, Mike, I know it's a little anecdotal based on your experience, but if we're getting to 90%, let's call it perfect content, this is a huge tool in the toolkit of SEOs, right? And I think we have to bring this all together for the audience today because we covered quite a few topics. But we talked about how the cookieless world, really to be very kind of SEO-centric and SEO ego-centric, it's going to mean good things for SEOs because the importance of SEO becomes that more dramatically kind of accentuated, right? And folks, grab those budgets because those retargeting budgets are not going to work, and you should get your hands on them as an example. We talked about how the antitrust lawsuits potentially are going to force Facebook and Google to be more transparent over time preemptively. We also talked about some terrifying things like the fact that third-party data and our ability to collect and maintain third-party data is diminished, and we're even more dependent on Google. So it's a bit of good news, bad news for the audience, folks. And what I'd like to do is to just say there's a lot here. I think we've got I'm up to 100 questions right now, and just would take it back to the panel before we jump into Q&A, and I give you guys a summary. Anything else you want to add about the sandwich board banging end of Nye or the rainbows coming out of the unicorns' butts that we have talked about today, guys, that you want to emphasize for our audience before we move into Q&A?
I got a few things real quick. I think one of the key takeaways, if I was sitting in one of your seats as an SEO and taking away some of the comments around content, around GTP3, around just the way that you approach optimization, I think the big thing here is that we need to stop optimizing for more, like more content, more pages, longer content. And we need to start optimizing for expectation. Like, what is this page about? And what are we trying to convey to users whether it be through our mobile UX efforts, whether it be through, the passage index and how passage index can help us, or GPT-3 and how we can leverage that to improve titles or improve, descriptions on our pages. Ultimately, I think really one of the big things that you need to be thinking about is what is the expectation that you want to produce and you want to provide users. And there's so many data points now out there, and there's so many tools now out there that can help you improve your job and make your job more scalable.
Mike, parting thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I just think that there's so much opportunity right now, especially at the intersection of, things that you can do with artificial intelligence and the things that we've been trying to do as SEOs in these like menial and tactical ways. And I think that there's such an opportunity for us to really open up to be doing things that are far more creative by leveraging, more of this technology to get us away from doing all these things that no one really ever wanted to do to begin with.
That's a good point. Eric, anything you want to add before we jump into summary and go to Q&A?
Yeah, I'm going to build on top of what Jordan said, which is just say it a little bit differently. I think we need to learn how to optimize for user needs. And, if somebody lands on your e-commerce page, selling, hubcaps, say, and you have a 2% conversion rate, and yet you think you've built the perfect page, and chances are that you probably haven't, especially since for most of you that sell hubcaps, that page shows the listings of 25 different hubcaps and doesn't have any other information on it. So you need to be thinking about just how do you build pages that meet all the needs that aren't immediately inherently obvious when they arrive at your page, and getting to that better depth of understanding what the user experience is really like across a broad array of people who arrive at that page. You start satisfying a higher percentage of those people, you'll get higher conversion rates and higher rankings at the same time.
Eric, Mike, Jordan, thanks so much. You're not quite off the hook yet. We're going to go into Q&A. Quickly before we get there, the quick summary for us is GPT-3 is friend, not foe. I'm not quite sure how it could be foe. Antitrust lawsuits with Google and Facebook are likely to benefit SEOs through preemptive transparency. Talked about that quite a bit. As always, long-form content continues to be king. Cookieless marketing will really mean dramatic changes for advertisers and further SEO's dependence on first-party data providers, and also an opportunity for you folks to grab some of that budget that's out there. And then finally, mobile indexing will force SEOs to adapt to new contexts and become more design-centric. You heard it from Jordan Cooney. Go out and take your mobile design courses. Okay, we have so many questions, folks. I'm going to just do my darndest to try and get to kind of the core of our topics or where we maybe missed some detail. And what I'm going to do is start us off on a lot of questions that were around parsing. We didn't spend a ton of time on there. And I think Kristen from Mary Kay, thanks for joining us today. I think her question nails this. So I'm going to put it back to the panel. Is Google driving or divvying up pages into passages and subtopics based on elements like H1, H2 tags or something more nuanced or content related? We did kind of skip through this, guys. Maybe Eric, start us out. How are they going to be parsing out this long form content for SERPs?
I don't believe that it's around tags. I think it's around an improved ability on their part, likely using AI or machine learning on their end to extract, this is my phraseology, not theirs, parcels of semantic meaning and understanding what topic is being covered in those various passages, and being able, even though they say at one moment, well, sometimes they say they're indexing them and sometimes they say they don't, so I'm not sure which they're doing at this point. But one way or another, they're able to track those and bring people to, so it's about having those encapsulated blocks of something meaningful that Google is attaching to, rather than tags.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's the time of tags. I didn't think you were going to say that we're going to need to be adding 15 H1s and H2s to every page. That makes sense. So effectively, Google's going to make their own decisions based on how they're crawling and interpreting data to parse that out. And I want to follow up on that, maybe over to Mike for this next one. This is from Rich from Autodesk. And Rich is asking, what's the ETA from when we'll start seeing passages, subtopics in SERPs, or is it already happening? And if so, can you point us to an example? So Mike, any idea when this is going to start happening for us?
I don't know the timeline exactly. I've seen people say that it's already out there, but I don't know the direct answer to this question. I think we're seeing and we're seeing like a form of it with what they're calling passage ranking, but I don't think that I can directly say like, oh, here's a direct example of subtopics at play right now.
Okay, good. Thanks for that, Mike. Guys, I'm gonna open up one here that wasn't something we've covered, but I just would be really curious. I'm hoping you guys be concise with this one. I'm going to try and take one more kind of detailed question where we maybe missed some of the content that people needed. But I love this question, and I've got to put it out to this panel. I have you guys. This is from Scott from New Media Advisors. We've heard speculation for years that Apple could roll out its own search engine. With Google paying Apple up to $12 billion per year, do you think Apple will ever launch a self-powered search engine? There's more to the question than that, but let me put it back out to the team. We've been hearing about this for quite some time. Will Apple take the leap? And will I also get a free electric self-driving car when that happens from Apple?
I'll kick us off here. So
Go ahead, Jordan.
First off, I mean, let's be honest. Apple's been doing this for a while now. And they've progressively been investing in a variety of different verticals that they've partnered with, quote unquote, Google with in the past. Most notably is their really great Apple Maps feature that I'm sure all of you enjoy using. But they've been investing in that in a long time, and I will say it has improved remarkably over the last couple of years. It's still pales in comparison to the competition, but it is a product that they verticalized, and they used to partner with Google. So I don't think that there's anything in their book that would prevent them from launching a search engine. I think that if they do it, they would do it in a very judicious and focused way. I don't think it would just be a blanket search engine that's another one in the market to compete with. I think it would have a lot to do with their core user base and how their core user base interacts with their devices.
Yeah, so for search, it's really simple. It's actually the same with the map story. Who has the most data wins. It's that simple. And the Apple Maps was terrible because it didn't have enough data. It's getting better because they're getting more data, but Google is still collecting it faster than they are. And search is an infinitely more complicated space to try to collect data for than Maps, in my opinion. Not that Maps is simple, but I don't see a third party catching up to Google until the paradigm fundamentally changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mike, go ahead.
All I would add is there's definitely an Apple car coming. Like, it's just like the natural progression of how they've taken over our lives. And I agree with everything else that's been said.
As long as we can get it in 6 or red, right, Mike? Okay. So, guys, final question before we roll off to the end of our hour here. And I think it's a really good one. It's just, we don't have enough time to cover all the detail we really need to cover, but it's back to GPT-3. And it's something that popped in my head as a company that has multi-language needs, that is Searchmetrics. And the question from Myron is GPT-3 expected to work on non-English content, non-English languages to be exact, and can it be used to perform automated translations? I think it's a great question. Who wants to take it? Eric, can I put it to you?
Okay, sure. Yes and yes.
Excellent. So what about the translation? Hey, Eric. So nobody ever liked you, Eric. Thank you for all the help there. Go ahead, please.
Maybe I can help.
No, but it is. I mean, the internet has all kinds of languages on it, right? So data is available to it. It has actually been demoed doing translations. So it's definitely in its capability set.
I just want to bring something up around GPT-3, and I just want to think. I think it's really important for people to recognize this because this has been in the media a lot. But like, facial recognition software has been around for a while now, also largely an AI-driven type technology. And the crazy thing about facial recognition software is that it is terrible at recognizing people of color. And as a mixed race person, right? half white, half Hispanic, you know, it's not sure if I'm Abraham Lincoln or Cesar Chavez. So it's not a very good technology at doing what it's intended to do until it has enough data and enough progress to really evolve. And so for translation, I think it's another one of those that's we're way far away from being at a place where this will help us accomplish that effectively without human intervention. So all it will really do is improve human productivity at this time.
Okay. Jordan, I love doing this, but it's time for you to stop talking. And to you and to Eric and Mike, thank you guys so much. Yet another great session. Really appreciate it. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you to the audience. And I'm just going to put in a quick plug for our next webinar. You can register at searchmetrics.com/webinar. Topic of the day used to be like it was a couple of years ago that it was you know, never mind, guys. Sorry. So core web vitals for enterprise business. I was going to make another joke. I won't do that. This is a hot topic for SEOs. It's on February 18th. I'm going to assume at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Please register for it. If you want the type of content you got today, come join us for that webinar. Mike, Jordan, Eric, thank you to our audience. Thank you for attending. And again, let's not forget Hamlet and dedicate today's webinar to him. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.